Darrin, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our Mother's Day podcast of Old Folks Cooking, the intersection of food, drink, and culture.
It's
And
good to be here. Good to be here with you, my friend.
I'm delighted to have you here and to talk about your fantastic mother, Jencks. A wonderful lady. Can you tell us a little bit more about her?
Well, she was such a character. I just, with her name Jencks, she was born Josephine Irene Taylor.
Really?
And she always hated the word Josephine. And one day she was with her dad and they spotted Maurice Chevalier.
Oh, really?
So her father was a real estate salesman, and he did some wonderful things. Like when Father Divine wanted to buy land up in Hudson Valley, not a single white realtor would talk to him, except for my grandfather, who helped him to find his estate that he ended up buying. So, for years, every once in a while, my mother remembered this big limo pulling up out front. I think it was a Duesenberg limo, and a liveried chauffeur opening the door, and Father Divine would get out and he'd go in and sit down, have a cup of coffee with my grandfather. But so he walks up to Maurice Chevalier and introduces himself and says, "This is my daughter, Josephine." And my mother looks and says, "Oh, please don't call me Josephine. I hate the name Josephine. I'm Jencks." Maurice Chevalier says, "But it's such a beautiful name. My mother's name is Josephine." She says, "Well, I'm sure she's a very nice lady, Mr. Chevalier, but I don't like the name Josephine. Please call me Jencks."
Oh, what a historic occasion, having Papa Divine and Maurice Chevalier in the Hudson Valley. It had to be historic. And wow, I did not know that tidbit about your grandparents,
Oh, yes.
your grandfather, and your mom.
There was also my grandfather and my mother ended up meeting so many wonderful people, partly because of her dad, everything being just who he was. And, my mother's the daughter of a titled Russian noblewoman. And there was a gangster up here who my grandfather helped him buy his building, buy his property and put up a building. And he was, his last name was Petrilli, and his nickname was the Gat, the old nickname for a machine gun. And he was part of Murder Incorporated. And he ended up, when my grandfather was very sick, he came to the house one day with his tailor. And the tailor was measuring my grandfather, and he came back a week later with a suit and a shirt and a silk tie and put an overcoat on him. And then for the coup de grace, he reached into this hat box and put this big fedora on my grandfather's head. And my mother looks at him and says, "Oh, gee, that's a George Raft hat," which was hilarious because Raft, of course, played gangsters in so many movies.
Yeah.
When my mom first moved to the city, she moved into Manhattan, and she was a bookkeeper, and she did a little modeling. And, back in those days, it was very, very hard for, women just were, you couldn't get a credit card. You couldn't get a checking account unless it was co-signed by a man. So being single, she had, her brother co-signed for her checking account. And she always loved going shopping at Lord and Taylor. Taylor was her maiden name. So she goes in one day and she saw this, a belt that she always wanted. She thought it was beautiful. She went back a couple of times and finally goes to the counter and says, "Okay, good, I'll take that belt. I'd like to buy that." And she pulls out her checkbook, and she didn't have a driver's license. So the young lady behind the counter says, "Oh, I need identification. May I see your driver's license, please?" And my mother doesn't skip a beat. She just looks up at her and thinks, "I'm in Lord and Taylor, and my name is Taylor. Let me see what I can do with this." So she smiles and says, "Oh, you must be new. We haven't met yet. I'm Jencks. Do call me Jencks. All my friends call me Jencks." And the young lady's jaw dropped. And well, yeah, yes, of course, Miss Taylor. And took the check and gave her her belt.
Well, Jencks was an absolutely beautiful woman with incredible style. And I see where the Met just had the dandy exhibition, but you're a dandy of yourself. And so I see where you and your brother Ken got it from.
Well, my mother always had her own sense of style. And
Well,
she used to do some amazing things. I remember one time Keith Haring had a shop down in Soho, and it just opened up. And I went down, and there was a sweatshirt that was silk screened with the acrobats, 4 guys on each other's shoulders, and Keith Haring's own inimitable style. And it was autographed by Keith Haring. They had a few that were autographed. So I grabbed one and I bought it for my mother, saying, I bet she doesn't even own a sweatshirt, but I'll bet she would love this.
right.
So she was a member of a business and professional women's club called Zonta. So she went to the next meeting wearing that with a pair of silk shantung pants. And one of the friends there says, Jencks, I've never seen you wear a sweatshirt. She says, well, this is by this wonderful young artist, Keith Haring, and my son Darrin bought it for me. I mean, it's autographed by the artist. I mean, this is a sweatshirt. It's a work of art. But I've never seen you wear a sweatshirt before. And of course, the next meeting, this girl comes in wearing just a dime store sweatshirt and a pair of jeans. Completely missing the point, but my mother had it. She knew what she was doing. So,
Darrin, can you share Jenks's favorite food and her favorite drink?
oh boy, her favorite food. She loves so many wonderful things. It's funny because her mother was a terrible cook. I mean, I love my grandmother dearly, but she was brought up in Russia in a house where they had a cook. So my grandmother didn't ever learn to cook. So she came to America. And so many, many years ago, one of my first cooking jobs, I'm working in an Italian restaurant. And once the owner found out that I could run the kitchen, he was off doing whatever things he was up to. So one day I get a table for one. And I put, of course, I put out my best. And at the end, the waitress says, guy on table 7 wants to see you. And I said, oh, okay. Is everything all right? I don't know. Oh, well, you don't know. You just waited on him. Is everything okay? Is he happy? I don't know. Oh, so I put on a clean chef's coat and I go walking out. And there's this major gangster sitting by himself at the table. And I recognize him and he looks at me and he says, you're not Italian. And I said, no, I can't hide this Irish face from you, can I? Well, sit down. I sit down and I looked at him and I said, well, first of all, is everything okay? He says, okay, it was delicious. Where'd you learn how to cook like this? You're not Italian. How'd you learn how to cook like this? And I said, well, I grew up in Newburgh. And he goes, oh, and you admit it? And I said, yeah, I admit it. I admit it. And I said, my mother grew up in a neighborhood and her mother was not a good cook at all. My mother used to babysit and half the neighborhood was Italian and half the neighborhood was Jewish. So she'd be babysitting for Miss Rosa one day and she'd go, Miss Rosa, oh, what are you making? Please show me how to make that. Show me how to cook that. And then next week she'd be, with the Cashmans and she'd say, Mrs. Cashman, show me how you make that. Show me how, please teach me how to make that. So she learned how to cook Italian, learned how to cook Jewish. The guy looks at me and says, really? And I said, yeah, next time you come in, I'll make you matzo ball soup.
Oh, wow.
And he started laughing, and I think he duked me a $50 bill. And this is very early 1980s.
Oh, that was a big hit back then. Those are some wonderful stories. And Jencks was a wonderful lady, and I was so privileged to meet her. And she was so warm and welcoming to me, and I'll never forget that. We need to convene over more stories because you and I shared an apartment in Harlem.
Absolutely. And, yeah, I know that once this old white man moved in, there went the neighborhood, I'll tell you. Man.
Well, we'll have to tell more stories about it, but thank you for paying a tribute to Jencks on Mother's Day and for our Mother's Day launch at Old Folks Cooking. Thank you so much. And
always a pleasure.
We'll be talking to you soon. And hopefully you can give us a recipe and or a drink that Jencks favored. Okay?
I've got one right up my sleeve for you. Let me know when you want me to do it.
Oh, well, we want it right away. Okay?
You got it. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Darrin.
Be well, my friend. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.